In the fall of 1589, a small town in Germany witnessed a terrifying trial. Peter Stubber, a well-known farmer from Bedburg, was accused of horrible crimes: murder, cannibalism, and something even more shocking. He confessed to owning a magical girdle given to him by the devil that turned him into a vicious creature, a werewolf. As punishment, he was laid on a wheel, and burning pincers were used to pull the flesh off his body. His legs and arms were broken and his head was removed. The body burned to ash. His daughter and mistress were burned to death with his corpse. And Stubber's severed head was spiked on a pole and displayed below a wooden carving of a wolf. But this wasn't the first time people claimed to turn into wolves. The werewolf story has been around for over 4,000 years, dating back to some of the earliest human writings. So what is it about the werewolf myth that has fascinated us for so long? Where did this myth come from? And what should you do if you ever come face to face with one of these creatures? Welcome to the mysteries of mythology, the werewolf. When I was very young, I repeatedly pestered my parents to let me watch a horror movie. The older children at school had watched the terrifying movies, The Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, and Friday the 13th. It was October. Halloween was fast approaching, and every night I begged my parents to let me stay up and watch one of the scarier horror movies. Finally, one night, my father said, "Okay." My mother wasn't so sure, but I was already on the couch by my father's side. That particular night there was a horror classic, The American Werewolf in London. The protagonist's transformation, the gruesome stretching and contorting of his limbs, was the most frightening thing I had ever seen. The rest of the night was filled with my adolescent screams. The image of the werewolf has prowled through the dark corners of human imagination for centuries, leaving its paw marks on folklore and literature across the entire globe. From the deserts of the Middle East to the forests of medieval Europe, the myth of the werewolf has grown to become one of the most popular monsters in the world, evolving with each retelling. So what is it about this beast that seems to resonate with so many of us? And why is it the wolf that is the most recognized of all the were creatures? The fear of humans turning into wild predators isn't limited to Europe or wolves alone. Across the world, many cultures have their own legends of people transforming into dangerous animals. In Africa, there are tales of were hyenas, while in Asia, stories of were tigers are common. Despite the variety of these myths, the werewolf stands out as the most infamous. Why has the werewolf legend endured and spread so widely? Perhaps it's because these stories tap into a deep-rooted fear of losing one's humanity, of crossing the line between man and beast. Or maybe it's because they offer a glimpse into the darker side of human nature, exploring the thin boundary between civilization and savagery. As we trace the origins of the werewolf myth from ancient times to the present day, we see a creature that, much like the wolf itself, has adapted to survive in the vast landscape of human imagination. Long before the first werewolf legends emerged, humans and wolves shared a complex relationship. As far back as 40,000 years ago, during the late Pleistocene era, wolves and humans began to interact more closely. Some wolves, bolder than others, would approach human settlements to scavenge leftover food. These scavengers played a crucial role in early human communities by helping to clear waste that could attract pests and spread diseases. Over time, humans recognized the advantages of domesticating wolves, using them as guards or hunting companions. Ancient people likely observed and respected the wolves' strength, cunning, and loyalty to their pack. Living so closely with such powerful creatures, It's no surprise that early humans started to imagine what it might be like to cross the boundary between man and wolf, to take on the wolf's strength and ferocity. This bond, both cooperative and competitive, laid the foundation for the werewolf myths that would later take shape. Before the werewolf became a symbol of uncontrollable rage and monstrous transformation, it was often seen as a tragic figure, a victim of a cruel curse. Early stories about werewolves focused on the sadness and longing that came with their transformation. These werewolves weren't evil monsters, but rather human souls trapped in the body of a beast, desperately wishing to return to their true form. One of the earliest examples comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, written nearly 4,000 years ago. During a conflict with Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, Gilgamesh recalls past relationships, including one with a shepherd who fell deeply in love with Ishtar. To show his devotion, the shepherd left offerings for her at a mountain shrine every day. At first, Ishtar encouraged him, but soon she grew bored and transformed him into a wolf. Tragically, he was torn apart by his own dogs. While there is some debate among scholars about whether the shepherd was transformed into a wolf or another animal, this tale remains one of the oldest known stories of a human being cursed to take on an animal form. These early werewolves are often portrayed as tormented souls, longing to return to their human lives. They might even find redemption if they can prove their humanity or devotion to a higher power. In many ancient cultures, warriors believed that by wearing the skins of wolves or other predators, they could absorb the strength and ferocity of these animals. These warriors weren't cursed, but chose to adopt the wolf's guise to empower themselves in battle. Germanic tribes had warriors known as wolf warriors, who wore wolf skins into combat. The Old Norse term ulfhednar, meaning wolf coat, suggests this was a common practice. In the 13th century Norse epic, the Völsunga saga, the hero Sigmund and his son Sinfjötli discover two magical wolf pelts in a forest hut. These pelts have the power to transform them into wolves, but they can only be removed after 10 days. In wolf form, the father and son roam the wilderness, embracing the savage instincts of the beasts they've become. However, Sinfjötli, ignoring his father's warnings, kills 11 men and is gravely injured in the process. After the 10 days, they return to human form, horrified by their actions. They burn the cursed pelts, realizing that the line between man and beast is dangerously thin, especially for those who live by the sword. This idea of warriors transforming into wolves also appears in early Greek literature. For instance, in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, warriors are often compared to wolves or lions, highlighting the brutal nature of battle. These transformations serve as metaphors for the savage instincts necessary to survive in war. Herodotus's Histories provides an even more explicit example, telling of a Baltic tribe, the Nuri, who were believed to transform into wolves for a few days each year. Although Herodotus doubted these transformations, the fact that he recorded the tale shows how widespread and deeply rooted the belief in werewolf warriors was in ancient cultures. Finally, there were stories of werewolves who weren't victims or warriors but the damned, those cursed as punishment for their violent or immoral deeds. These werewolves were feared and despised, representing the dark side of human nature. At a time when the boundaries between civilization and savagery were precariously thin, the idea that a person could transform into a wolf, one of nature's most fearsome predators, struck a deep chord with ancient societies. This transformation was often seen as a consequence of violating sacred taboos, especially those surrounding cannibalism and murder. One famous example is the story of King Lycaon of Arcadia, who tested Zeus's omniscience by serving him a meal made from human flesh. Some accounts say it was one of Lycaon's own sons. Enraged by this horrific act, Zeus struck Lycaon's children with lightning and transformed Lycaon into a wolf. According to Ovid's Metamorphoses, Lycaon's transformation was particularly gruesome. His arms became legs, his robes turned into shaggy hair, yet he was still Lycaon, the same grayness, the same fierce face, the same red eyes, a picture of bestial savagery. Lycaon wasn't just turned into a wolf, he became a monstrous hybrid forever caught between man and beast. Another example is the story of Demonatus of Parasia, an Olympic boxer who, during the Arcadian sacrifices for the festival of Zeus Lycaeus, tasted the intestines of a human child. As punishment, he was transformed into a wolf for 10 years. Afterward, he returned to human form and competed in the ancient Olympic Games. Had he eaten human flesh in his wolf form again, he would have remained a wolf for the rest of his life. These early depictions of werewolves as victims, warriors, or the damned laid the foundation for the varied mythology that followed, illustrating the complex and often terrifying relationship between man and beast. If you've watched enough werewolf films, the word Lycaon might sound familiar.
Though lycans were fewer in number, the war itself had become more perilous.
The Greek word lykos means wolf, and anthropos means man. Combined, they give us lycanthropy, which translates to wolfman syndrome. The term was first used by the 2nd century Greek physician Marcellus to describe men who behaved like wolves and frequented cemeteries. Interestingly, the word werewolf comes from the Old English words wer, meaning man, and wolf, meaning wolf. Some believe that wolf also referred to a hunter, so werewolf could be translated as man-hunter. The werewolf myth taps into some of our deepest fears. These stories aren't just about the terror of being hunted by a beast, they explore the fear of becoming one. Wolves are opportunistic eaters, known to scavenge and sometimes even eat their own kind. This behavior likely contributed to the symbolic link between wolves and cannibalism, reinforcing the idea that those who engaged in such acts were no longer fully human, but had crossed over into the realm of the beast. In the 1st century CE, the Roman author Pliny the Elder wrote Naturalis Historia, which described strange creatures and people found on the edges of the expanding Roman Empire. Among these creatures were the cynocephali, or dog-heads, who were believed to have gained their wolf-like appearance because of cannibalism. As Europe transitioned from paganism to Christianity, the werewolf myth underwent significant changes to fit with new religious and cultural beliefs. In earlier times, werewolves were considered real creatures, deeply rooted in folklore. However, with the rise of Christianity, the Church began to view these myths through a different lens. The Church saw the idea of werewolves as pagan and therefore sinful. According to Christian doctrine, only God had the power to transform a person into another creature, so any claim of becoming a werewolf was either madness or evidence of demonic influence. What was once a figure of folklore became a symbol of heresy and evil, used by the Church to instill fear and enforce religious conformity. As the Church sought to suppress pagan beliefs, it also tried to control the spread of werewolf stories. The idea that a mere mortal could use magic to transform into an animal was seen as a challenge to divine authority and therefore akin to satanic worship. This effort to erase the werewolf from history shows just how deeply the Church feared the persistence of these pagan symbols. By the 16th century, the Church's stance on werewolves had shifted. Previously, belief in werewolves was seen as sinful, but now, not believing in them was considered heresy. This change was likely driven by the Church's failed attempts over centuries to eradicate the belief in werewolves, as well as the emergence of a new pagan figure gaining notoriety: the witch. During the witch trials that swept through Europe from the late 15th to the 18th centuries, the fear of werewolves became intertwined with the fear of witches. In some regions, werewolves were hunted and persecuted alongside witches. The Church now claimed that the devil could transform humans into wolves as punishment for their sins. This belief was further solidified by the publication of the Malleus Maleficarum in 1486, a text authored by Catholic clergyman Heinrich Kramer and Jacob Sprenger. The Malleus Maleficarum became the definitive guide for identifying, prosecuting, and punishing witches, and it extended this to werewolves, suggesting that certain witches could transform into wolves through an illusion created by the devil. While the werewolf myth shares common themes worldwide, it has been shaped by different cultures, each adding its own unique twist. Two of the most influential traditions in shaping werewolf stories across Europe come from the Nordic and Celtic traditions. The spread of Germanic Nordic traditions, especially during the Viking Age, had a major impact on werewolf legends throughout Europe. As these Norse traditions blended with local myths, they introduced the fierce imagery of berserkers, warriors believed to take on the spirit of wolves or bears in battle. These berserkers, known for their ferocity and almost supernatural strength, were thought to channel the essence of these powerful animals, blurring the line between human and beast. In Eastern Europe, countries like Serbia, Denmark, and Russia have their own unique interpretations of the werewolf legend, each reflecting the cultural nuances of the region. In Serbian folklore, it was believed that drinking water from a wolf's footprint could turn a person into a werewolf, connecting the individual to the wolf's spirit. In Denmark, a nationalistic twist on the myth suggested that only Danish men could transform into werewolves. Meanwhile, in Russian folk traditions, a witch could curse someone to become a werewolf by placing her girdle under a house's threshold on a wedding day. Anyone who crossed this threshold would be doomed to a life of horror, transforming into a wolf. Historical accounts and legends from medieval Europe even include rulers believed to possess the ability to transform into wolves. One such figure is Vseslav of Polotsk, a Slavic prince who ruled parts of what is now Belarus. According to local legends, Vseslav was a sorcerer who could change into a wolf, prowling his lands by night and returning to his human form by day. As Europe moved into the 17th century, belief in werewolves began to decline. Advances in medicine, psychology, and a better understanding of the natural world led people to see werewolves as more of a fantastical fiction than a terrifying reality. This shift towards rational thought marked the beginning of a new era, where those who claimed to be werewolves, or were accused of being such, were often examined through a more logical lens. During this time, early attempts were made to explain werewolf behavior as the result of mental illness or criminal insanity, rather than demonic possession or supernatural forces. Historians and scholars began to reinterpret werewolf trials, suggesting that many of the so-called werewolves might have actually been early examples of serial killers, individuals who confessed to terrible crimes while suffering from delusions or mental disorders. This new perspective marked a turning point in the history of the werewolf myth. Even though belief in werewolves was on the decline, the myth still held significance in certain parts of society, particularly in more remote or less developed regions. In these areas, werewolves were sometimes viewed as outcasts, criminals, those shunned by society, or people who had fallen on hard times during periods of famine. These individuals, living on the fringes of society, adopted a wolf-like existence, surviving through hunting, raiding, and forming new communities in the wilderness. As the Enlightenment gave way to the 19th century, the werewolf myth saw a resurgence, particularly in Victorian literature. This era, known for its strict social rules and fascination with the macabre, found new ways to incorporate the werewolf into its stories, often using it as a symbol of the fears and anxieties of the time. In Victorian tales, the werewolf came to represent moral and psychological decay, a creature symbolizing the hidden darkness within the human soul, lurking beneath the surface of civilized society. One of the most notable examples of this renewed interest in werewolves is George Reynolds's Wagner, The Werewolf, published in 1847. In this novel, the protagonist, driven by ambition, makes a Faustian pact with the devil in exchange for eternal youth. But this bargain comes with a terrible price. At the end of each month, he transforms into a violent, howling wolf. The story uses the werewolf as a metaphor for the duality of human nature, exploring the conflict between the civilized self and the beast within. This resurgence of the werewolf in literature did more than just bring back an old myth. It reinvented it, turning the werewolf into a symbol of the Victorian struggle with the dark, irrational forces that lay just beneath the surface of modern society. As the 19th century progressed, the werewolf continued to evolve, finding new life in the emerging genre of horror fiction and eventually becoming a fixture on the silver screen. The werewolf, once a creature of ancient legend, had now become a mirror reflecting the fears and uncertainties of a rapidly changing world. As the 20th century progressed, the werewolf myth found a powerful new platform: cinema. The advent of film allowed the dramatic transformation of the werewolf to be visualized in ways that literature and folklore never could. Through Hollywood's lens, the werewolf evolved, taking on traits and themes that would define it in modern popular culture. The werewolf made its major cinematic debut in the 1935 film Werewolf of London. This film introduced several key elements that would become staples in werewolf mythology, such as the idea that the werewolf curse could be transmitted through a bite, likening it to an infectious disease. Additionally, Werewolf of London cemented the now iconic connection between werewolves and the full moon, with the transformation triggered by the moon's light, a detail that has since become one of the most enduring aspects of the legend. In 1941, The Wolfman further solidified the werewolf's place in cinematic history. This film introduced the concept that silver was the only thing capable of killing a werewolf, a notion that would become a standard in werewolf lore. The film also carried significant allegorical weight, with elements reflecting deeper societal fears and historical contexts. As the mid-20th century approached, the werewolf myth began to intertwine with the turbulent experience of adolescence. Starting in the 1950s, werewolves increasingly symbolized male aggression and the uncertainties of teenage life. Films like I Was a Teenage Werewolf, 1957, captured this shift, portraying the werewolf as a manifestation of the angst and rage that often accompany adolescence. The werewolf's uncontrollable transformations mirrored the hormonal changes and emotional turmoil that teenagers experience, making the myth a metaphor for the darker aspects of growing up. As the century progressed, filmmakers and writers began to explore deeper issues of identity and transformation through the werewolf myth. By the late 20th century, films like Ginger Snaps reimagined the werewolf's transformation as a powerful analogy for female adolescence, using the horror of the change to comment on the challenges young women face as they navigate the transition to adulthood. The Underworld series, portrays lycans, a more powerful type of werewolf, locked in an ancient war with vampires. The films explore themes of revenge, rebellion, and freedom, reimagining the werewolf myth as a story of oppression and the fight against a tyrannical ruling class. And then there's this. These have more to do with six-packs than werewolves. As science, particularly in medicine and psychology, advanced, the werewolf myth began to be seen through a more rational lens. One of the developments was the idea of lycanthropy being a mental illness. In this condition, known as clinical lycanthropy, individuals genuinely believe they have transformed or are in the process of transforming into animals, most commonly wolves. This rare disorder has been documented throughout history, with people exhibiting delusions of being or becoming a wolf. Historical accounts of werewolf trials and confessions often resemble the symptoms of clinical lycanthropy, suggesting that some of those accused of being werewolves might have actually been suffering from this psychological disorder. Other medical explanations have also been proposed to account for the werewolf phenomenon, particularly those related to hallucinations and delusions. For instance, ergot poisoning, caused by consuming grains infected with the ergot fungus, can lead to severe hallucinations and symptoms that might be interpreted as a transformation into something non-human. Similarly, the ingestion of hallucinogenic mushrooms used in some ancient rituals could cause altered states of consciousness, leading people to believe they had taken on the form of an animal. Medical conditions like hypertrichosis, sometimes called werewolf syndrome, due to excessive hair growth over the body, also played a role in shaping the werewolf myth. Individuals suffering from this condition might have been seen as having crossed the boundary between human and beast, further embedding the idea of werewolves in the collective imagination. Rabies, another condition with symptoms like fever, confusion, excessive saliva, and aggressive behavior, could also have contributed to the belief in werewolves. It's easy to see how before the advent of modern medicine, such conditions were not just misunderstood. They were feared as evidence of the supernatural, further solidifying the werewolf myth in humanity's collective consciousness. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like or I'll bite you.